It was a bright morning in Willow Creek, a town known for its quiet streets and friendly neighbors. The courthouse stood like a symbol of justice in the center of town, where routine hearings filled the docket. But today, the air inside the building felt heavy, almost tense, as if everyone sensed something extraordinary was about to happen. People whispered in the hallways, speculating about the case everyone had been talking about for weeks. The man at the center of it all, Eric Palmer, entered the courtroom with steady steps and a blank expression that revealed nothing about what he was thinking. His tailored suit and calm posture didn't match the image of a criminal that most had imagined. Some even wondered if the whole thing was a mistake. Eric had been a respected businessman, the kind of person people trusted with their investments and savings. He sponsored local events, donated to charities, and was often seen smiling in photos with community leaders. That picture of perfection began to crack when investigators discovered millions of dollars missing from several accounts connected to his company. At first, the case seemed simple, embezzlement by a man who had fallen into financial trouble. But rumors started spreading, and the tension only grew stronger. The gallery was packed with journalists, locals, and curious onlookers who wanted to witness what would happen next. They expected a regular court proceeding, a typical sentence that matched similar financial crimes. After all, Eric had no criminal record, no history of violence, and a family that depended on him. But no one in that room could have predicted how this day would unfold. The moment Judge Boyd entered and the gavel struck against the wood, the buzzing chatter died instantly. Everyone's eyes locked on the bench, waiting for a decision that would soon become a nationwide headline. The investigation into Eric Palmer's financial dealings started as a routine audit but quickly spiraled into something much darker. Detectives expected to find missing funds and a trail of bad decisions, but what they uncovered went far beyond simple fraud. Hidden beneath layers of fake companies and offshore accounts was a system designed to move large sums of money without detection. These weren't just stolen funds from clients. This was money that led back to dangerous people. Evidence showed Eric had been working with a criminal network, laundering millions through charitable organizations that only existed on paper. The deeper investigators dug, the more shocking the details became. Bank statements linked Eric to shell corporations spread across multiple countries. Transactions revealed patterns of large payments sent to individuals with violent histories. These names weren't just criminals, they were connected to organized crime. Prosecutors presented emails that shattered the illusion of Eric as a respected businessman. In those emails, Eric discussed ways to handle competition, and the language was cold and calculated. 2 local business owners who had publicly clashed with Eric had disappeared within the last year, cases that remained unsolved. Now, with this evidence, suspicion pointed directly at him. Investigators also found encrypted messages that hinted at deals involving intimidation and threats. It was no longer about money. It was about control, power, and the willingness to destroy anyone who stood in his way. When the prosecution revealed these findings in court, the entire room shifted. People who once defended Eric stared in disbelief. The man who once appeared generous and trustworthy now seemed like someone entirely different, a man who had built his empire on lies, fear, and blood. This revelation turned a simple fraud trial into one of the most chilling cases the town had ever seen. As the trial continued, the real picture of Eric Palmer's secret life started to emerge. At first, people believed his crimes were tied to desperation or financial collapse, but the truth was far more disturbing. Eric's business had been struggling for years, but instead of seeking legal solutions, he had chosen a darker path. He became obsessed with maintaining his image of success, even if it meant crossing into criminal territory. Investigators uncovered evidence of a gambling addiction that drained his resources. High-stakes poker games in private clubs, online bets in offshore accounts. Eric was risking everything. When losses piled up, he began funneling company money to cover his debts, but even that wasn't enough. The prosecution revealed shocking purchases that contradicted the image of a struggling businessman. A villa in another country, luxury sports cars registered under fake names, and extravagant trips paid for with stolen funds. These revelations painted a picture of greed and arrogance. The defense tried to argue that Eric was under pressure and made poor choices, but the evidence suggested something else. He wasn't just hiding money, he was protecting something much bigger. The breaking point came when the prosecution introduced a recording. It was Eric's voice, calm and unshaken, discussing how to make a person disappear without leaving a trace. That person was a former business partner who had threatened to expose him. The courtroom froze as the audio played. It wasn't the voice of a man caught in a bad situation. It was the voice of someone who had crossed every line to protect his empire. Jurors exchanged uneasy glances, and even Eric's supporters seemed to shrink in their seats. This single piece of evidence changed everything. What had begun as a financial crime case had now turned into something far more sinister, a case tied to violence and murder. The day of sentencing arrived, and the courthouse was overflowing. Reporters filled the corridors, their cameras ready to capture what they expected to be a standard conclusion to a white-collar crime case. Everyone assumed Eric Palmer would receive a few years in prison, maybe less with good behavior. After all, he was a first-time offender with strong community ties. His family sat in the front row, their faces pale and tense, clinging to hope that the judge would show mercy. Judge Boyd entered the courtroom with a stern expression, holding the thick case file that had taken months to build. The silence was almost suffocating as everyone waited for the decision. Before announcing the sentence, the judge spoke about the gravity of the evidence. He detailed the financial fraud, the laundering scheme, and the chilling evidence that linked Eric to violent crimes. Every word cut deeper, shattering any illusions of leniency. The defense had pleaded for compassion, highlighting Eric's family and his lack of prior convictions, but those arguments seemed insignificant in the face of what the judge described. When the sentence was finally delivered, the entire room seemed to stop breathing. 16 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Gasps erupted from the gallery, followed by frantic whispers. Eric's family broke down in tears, unable to process the reality of what had just happened. Eric himself remained motionless, his face pale but emotionless, as though the weight of his actions had finally settled on him. The journalists rushed out to break the news, knowing this moment would dominate headlines across the country. Judge Boyd made it clear that this was not just punishment for fraud but for years of deception, greed, and actions that endangered lives. It was a sentence that would send shockwaves far beyond the walls of that courtroom. The news of Eric Palmer's sentence spread like wildfire, dominating television broadcasts and social media feeds. For the people of Willow Creek, it was a day that would never be forgotten. The man they had trusted, admired, and even celebrated was now behind bars for nearly 2 decades. His once flourishing company collapsed overnight, leaving employees without jobs and investors scrambling to recover their losses. Every billboard that once carried his smiling face now served as a reminder of how far he had fallen. As Eric began his life in prison, investigators continued to dig into his past. What they found only deepened the sense of shock. More offshore accounts surfaced, connected to individuals with ties to organized crime. Authorities believed Eric had been on the verge of expanding his operations internationally before the whistleblower exposed him. Without that single act of courage, countless others could have been drawn into his schemes or silenced forever. For the victims who lost their businesses and savings, the sentence brought a sense of closure, though the scars ran deep. Families who had trusted Eric with their future were left broken, trying to rebuild what they had lost. The 2 missing businessmen who had crossed paths with Eric were never found, but their disappearances remained an open investigation, casting a long shadow over his crimes. Judge Boyd's decision became a turning point in legal discussions about white-collar crime, showing that financial fraud tied to violent acts would be punished severely. It was more than a sentence. It was a message that greed and corruption, no matter how well hidden, would eventually be exposed. For years to come, people would talk about the case of Eric Palmer, not just as a story of crime, but as a chilling example of how easily power and ambition can destroy everything.